Let's start with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. If you loved the first two games, get ready to have your mind blown, because this sequel takes everything up a notch. It's got all the web-swinging, action-packed, open-world goodness from the first game, but with some seriously awesome upgrades that make you feel even more like Spidey. First off, swinging through New York again? Man, I could do that for hours. The way they've refined the web-swinging mechanics is just so smooth. You're gliding through the city, flipping between skyscrapers, and pulling off crazy mid-air tricks. There's this new web glider thing that lets you cover so much ground so fast. It's like Spidey's flying, and it's the best feeling when you're cruising over Central Park or zipping through tight alleyways. It makes you feel unstoppable, and you'll never want to use fast travel. And this time, you get to switch between Peter and Miles, which is a game changer. Both of them have their own fighting styles and unique abilities, so it never feels repetitive. Peter's got his classic gadgets, but now he's also rocking those symbiote powers that just feel brutal. You can really feel the strength when he's using them. It's like he's just tearing through enemies. And then you've got Miles, who's all about that flashy Venom energy. I loved how you could seamlessly switch between them, depending on the mission or just how you wanted to play. The combat, too, has been seriously upgraded. It's fast, fluid, and makes you feel like you're choreographing these epic battles. You're pulling off these crazy combos, switching between gadgets, and using your environment to take down enemies in the most creative ways possible. Next we have Silent Hill 2 Remake. I've got to say, it totally nails that eerie, unsettling vibe that made the original such a classic. I mean, Silent Hill 2 is already one of the most iconic horror games out there, but this remake, it's like they took all the stuff that creeped us out back in the day and cranked it up with these incredible graphics and sound design. The foggy town of Silent Hill looks absolutely gorgeous in this remake. Well, in a terrifying, twisted way, of course. The way the fog moves, the way the shadows creep along the streets, it's so atmospheric. Walking through those empty, run-down streets, you can just feel the tension building. I caught myself hesitating before turning corners, just bracing for whatever nightmare was waiting around the bend. The monsters are just insane. Pyramid Head is back, and just as horrifying as ever. Seeing him in high definition? Yeah, it gave me chills. And the sound design makes it even worse. In the best way. You'll hear these distant, unsettling noises, and it just puts you on edge the entire time. The sound of the radio static kicking in right before a monster appears still gets me every time. What I also love is how faithful the remake is to the original, but it also adds some nice quality of life improvements. The controls feel smoother. The combat is a little more refined, but it still keeps that you're not some action hero vibe. Every encounter with a monster feels dangerous, like you're barely scraping by, which is exactly what you want in a horror game like this. If you're into survival horror at all, or if you loved the original, you've got to check this out. Next we have Detroit Become Human. It's one of those games where you're not just watching a story play out, you're actually shaping it. Your choices matter, and I mean really matter. The choices aren't always easy either. Sometimes you're like, what's the right choice here? And there's no clear answer. It's all about what you value, and that affects the relationships you build and the path you take. There's this branching storyline, so the game reacts to your choices in a way that feels organic. Each playthrough can be so different, and it's wild seeing how even small decisions can snowball into something huge later on. You play as 3 different androids, each with their own story, and the game does an amazing job of making you care about each one. You feel invested in their struggles, their choices, and what they want for their lives. The best part for me was the emotional weight. The game digs into some pretty deep themes: freedom, empathy, what it means to be human. And because it's so interactive, it really makes you think about what you do in these situations. By the end, you're not just playing a game, you're reflecting on your own beliefs and choices, which is pretty rare for a video game. And Detroit doesn't shy away from tension either. There are moments where you're genuinely on the edge of your seat, trying to make quick decisions that could totally change everything. And the stakes are high because, things can go wrong in big ways if you make a wrong call. So, yeah, Detroit Become Human is perfect if you're into games that let you dig into a story deeply, and that give you control over what happens. It's genuinely unforgettable. Next we have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. From the very beginning, you're dropped into this massive open world, and it's completely up to you what to do next. No hand-holding, no strict path, just pure, unfiltered exploration. One of the coolest things about Breath of the Wild is the sense of freedom. You see a mountain way off in the distance, you can climb it. You spot a random little forest on your way to a shrine, Go explore it. You might find a secret or even stumble on a side quest. And the game rewards you for being curious. Everywhere you go, there's something hidden, some surprise, some little detail that makes you feel like the developers thought of everything. And speaking of surprises, the physics and chemistry systems in this game are unreal. You can use the environment to solve puzzles in ways that feel totally unique to you. Like, if you're clever enough, you can create crazy solutions to puzzles that don't even feel right. But the game encourages that. You can even use metal weapons to attract lightning during storms or set grass on fire to create updrafts for your glider. It's like a sandbox that's just begging you to mess around and get creative. And let's not forget the combat. It's challenging, but in a really rewarding way. You don't just mindlessly hack and slash. You need to time your dodges, be aware of your surroundings, and think about your strategy. The weapon durability system is a hot topic, but honestly, it adds to that survival feel. You're encouraged to experiment with different weapons and tactics, which keeps things interesting. Next we have Borderlands 3. The combat in Borderlands 3 is just pure, unfiltered chaos in the best way possible. You've got guns that shoot other guns, grenades that create black holes, and even weapons that yell insults while you fire them. It's not just about how many guns there are, though there are a lot. It's how creative and ridiculous they are. Every time you pick up a new weapon, you never know if it's going to completely change how you play, or just make you laugh out loud. And let's not forget the movement. They've really amped it up in this game. You can slide, mantle, and just zoom around the battlefield like a maniac. It makes every encounter feel dynamic and keeps the adrenaline pumping. There's nothing quite like sliding into cover, tossing out your action skill, and watching as absolute mayhem unfolds around you. Now let's talk about the world. Or should I say worlds? This isn't just Pandora anymore. Nope. Borderlands 3 takes you to multiple planets, each with its own unique vibe. You've got lush jungles, neon-lit cities, and even deserts that feel alive with danger and opportunity. It's a visual feast, and the art style? Still that iconic comic book-inspired look, but sharper and more vibrant than ever. It's like someone took a Saturday morning cartoon, threw in some chaos, and cranked it up to HD. Now, I know some people think the story in Borderlands 3 might be a bit wild or over the top, but that's kind of the point. It's unapologetically zany. And for me, that's a big part of the charm. It's not trying to be deep or serious. Next we have Resident Evil 5. Now, Resident Evil 5 does things a little differently than some of the other games in the series. It's not about creeping down dark hallways or fighting off sudden jump scares every 2 seconds. This one leans way more into action, and let me tell you, it does that action really well. One of the things that makes Resident Evil 5 stand out is its co-op gameplay. If you've got a friend to play with, this game is seriously a blast. You and your partner are constantly working together, covering each other's backs, sharing resources, strategizing against big enemies. And trust me, it makes the entire experience so much better. Whether you're playing as Chris Redfield or Shiva Alomar, you're both crucial to the fight. And that dynamic is what makes this game feel so fresh in the Resident Evil lineup. I remember the first time I played with a friend. We were yelling at each other, trying to stay alive, and it was chaos in the best possible way. Now combat here is amped up, and Resident Evil 5 fully commits to that action-packed style. You're fighting waves of infected, managing your ammo, using different weapons, and some of the encounters feel big and intense. I'm talking heart-pounding moments where you're surrounded, low on ammo, and desperately strategizing to make it out alive. The game's got this great mix of survival horror and all-out action that makes every fight feel like a scene straight out of a movie. But even if you're going solo, the AI partner, Shiva, if you're Chris, actually does a pretty solid job. Next we have Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. The moment you step into the new content, it feels different, like you've entered a darker, stranger, and somehow even more intimidating part of the world. If the lands between were a fever dream, Shadow of the Erdtree is a full-on nightmare, but like the kind you don't want to wake up from because it's just too cool. Combat is as tight and brutal as ever. Whether you're a die-hard melee player, a magic enthusiast, or a mix of both, there are new weapons, spells, and builds to experiment with. I found myself tweaking my character constantly, trying out new strategies for every encounter. It's that classic From Software loop of getting crushed, learning, adjusting, and finally triumphing that makes the whole experience so addictive. And the bosses? Let's just say they're not here to play. They're here to humble you, to make you question every decision you've ever made as a gamer. But at the same time, They're incredible. Each one feels like its own mini-story, with designs and movesets that are as much a spectacle as they are a challenge. There's nothing quite like the adrenaline rush of finally figuring out that perfect dodge timing or landing the killing blow after a 15-minute duel. It's frustrating in the best way possible. But it's not just about the bosses. The enemies scattered throughout this expansion are no joke either. They're relentless, weird, and occasionally terrifying. One moment I was admiring the scenery, the next I was getting ambushed by some unholy abomination I couldn't even describe if I tried. It's classic Elden Ring chaos, and I love it. Next we have Portal 2, one of the smartest, funniest, and most satisfying games out there. I mean, if you've ever wondered what it's like to solve complex puzzles while being gently or not so gently insulted by an AI, this is the game to play. From the moment you wake up, you know you're in for a unique experience. You play as Chell, this silent character stuck in a strange, abandoned science facility, and your main tool is this incredible portal gun. With it, you can create 2 connected portals on certain surfaces, letting you move through them in ways that feel almost magical. The whole concept of thinking with portals is amazing because it forces you to look at puzzles in a totally different way. What I love about Portal 2 is how it gradually ramps up the challenge. At first, it's simple stuff, figuring out where to place portals to get from point A to point B. But then they throw in all these wild mechanics like tractor beams, light bridges, and these crazy gels that speed you up or make you bounce. It's like each level is teaching you to think bigger, get more creative, and really push the limits of what's possible with just portals. The best part, though, has to be the co-op mode. Portal 2 lets you team up with a friend, and it's an absolute blast. You play as 2 adorable robots, and the puzzles are designed around the idea of working together. It's hilarious, challenging, and such a great way to test your teamwork. If you're into smart puzzles, and a game that constantly surprises you, Portal 2 is an absolute must-play. It's not just a puzzle game. Next we have Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Ubisoft had a pretty solid reputation with the previous game, Ghost Recon Wildlands, so expectations were high for this one. But when Breakpoint dropped, it was met with a ton of criticism. People were upset with everything, from the bugs and glitches to the live service elements and microtransactions. Some felt the game had drifted too far from what made the Ghost Recon series great, tactical, squad-based military action. A lot of the backlash was around the game's focus on looter-shooter mechanics. Fans of the series weren't too happy about the addition of gear scores and loot systems, which felt more like something out of the Division rather than a tactical military shooter. That shift towards a more RPG-like system was jarring for longtime fans, and many felt it took away from the realism and immersion they loved about the franchise. Another big complaint was the lack of AI teammates at launch, which had been a staple in past Ghost Recon games. Instead, you were forced to play solo or with real players in co-op, and that left some players feeling like the experience was incomplete. But here's the thing. Ubisoft listened to the feedback. Over time, they patched the game, added new features, and really worked to improve the overall experience. AI teammates were eventually brought back, and many of the issues with bugs and balance were addressed. The game today is a much better, more polished version than it was at launch. Despite the rough start, Breakpoint offers a lot for fans of tactical shooters. It's a solid game that's way better than people give it credit for. Next we have BioShock. It changes the way you think about storytelling in video games. It's set in Rapture, this underwater city that was meant to be a utopia. But when you arrive, things have clearly gone very, very wrong. From the moment you step out of that bathysphere and see the city for the first time, you know you're in for something special. The atmosphere is just dripping with tension and mystery, and it pulls you in immediately. The story is a masterpiece. Without getting into spoilers, let's just say that it's filled with twists and turns that keep you hooked the entire way. And the way the game tackles themes of power, control, and free will, it's on another level. The characters, like Andrew Ryan, are unforgettable, with some of the most iconic lines in gaming history. You're constantly questioning what's really going on, and by the time you get to the big reveal, it's absolutely mind-blowing. The combination of guns and plasmids gives you a ton of variety in combat. You're not just shooting enemies. You're using all sorts of powers like shooting electricity, freezing foes, or even setting them on fire. The game gives you so many ways to approach every situation, and that makes each encounter feel fresh. Plus, there are the big daddies, these towering, armored monsters that protect the little sisters. Every fight with them feels like a boss battle, and it's always intense. The moral choices in the game are another standout feature. You can choose to either save or harvest the little sisters, and those decisions have a real impact on how the game unfolds. It adds a layer of depth to the story, making you question what kind of person you want to be in this world.